welcome back to another 6 Sages Gaming video. Today I'm going to talk about the top 5 constructed decks in closed beta today. Now I do want to add some disclaimers to the start of this. These lists are ones that were passed on to me, about a month ago, and I've updated them to my own personal flavor, so I was not the original creator of any of these, with the exception of Black Red Econ and then the Blue Black Econ, which I'll show at a later time. It's close to the one on this list, but not exactly. So this is really just meant to be more of a helpful resource for you to understand kind of how these different decks work, maybe figure out what you want to play day one, and also just have a general understanding of what these do. Now, I included the rarity breakdown. That seemed like a thing that a lot of people would either want or was requested on Twitter, so I figured, hey, let's do that as well. The one thing I will note that green-red ramp does jump out at 18 rares, but hopefully that doesn't continue on once the list gets optimized and people have a little bit more time to play with it and really refine the numbers. The one thing I do want to talk to a little bit more, or get the understanding out there, a issue, if you will, with Artifact right now is that so many of the heroes in the respective colors are just auto-picked. So if you're playing either 3 red or 2 red, you probably have Axe and Legion Commander for your 2, or if you're playing 3, it's going to be these 3. Yes, this is going to flex a little bit, but it's also the main reason why I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about the heroes in this video. There's going to be a ton of overlap, and I'm sure Swim or some of the other great content creators have already given their rankings for these different heroes, so I hopefully won't have to spend too much time on that. Of course, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them in the comments below, but generally speaking, if you are looking at a 3-color spread for any deck that you're making, say you want 3 red and 2 green, you're going to be most likely picking those 3 red heroes and maybe Drow Ranger and Omni Knight for your 2 green splash. Now, yes, that's going to vary a little bit based on your personal choices in the deck, or maybe you just don't have access to those cards, but overall, for the 3 of picks of a color, I do believe that these are the 3 that you want to start for the respective houses. Beyond that, I do also want to add another just meta comment about constructed. We've had a good amount of time. By no means is the meta solved, but there are key cards that you should be aware of, and they do appear in these lists quite frequently, so I wanted to pull them up to the front, just get them out of the way now and talk about them and acknowledge them. Time of Triumph, if you've been watching any of the videos that have been out, either the preview event that was this past weekend or for the PAX events, it's just an insane card. Every single red deck that I've seen, with the solo exception of the red-black aggro deck, runs a minimum 2 of this card. Simply put, if we work with the understanding that 4 attack is worth 7 gold in the example of Broadsword, you can start to understand that the power to gold ratio that Time of Triumph offers you on just 1 hero makes it a very strong card. Now keep in mind that you're going to be spending this on 2 to 3 heroes in a lane, and it really does start to add up. Annihilation is a key card for blue if you're playing a slower, more controlling deck, and a lot of cards that you're going to be playing have to either acknowledge that we have Cheating Death, or you want to find ways to get around it. It is something that you're going to have to play around in the meta. While blue decks do feel a little lacking outside of, say, blue-red control, which we will be talking about a little bit later, it is still a card that I keep on my mind when I'm playing against an opponent. And then lastly, we have Cheating Death, which is just a upsetting card, to say the least. As a control player personally, I am very much a fan of being able to play Annihilation, right? You sacrifice stuff. It's an even amount that you both players give up. Obviously, you're losing a card in the process too. You both get gold. It feels very fair to be able to play that Annihilation, try to catch back up in the game. And Cheating Death really does start to take away from that. And on top of that, it is a random chance. So all your stuff is going to go away, and maybe some of your opponent's stuff will die too. Cheating Death itself is just a very powerful card that, again, is going to be a 2 to 3 of. I've seen, I think, mostly 2 in my experience in almost every single green deck. The one thing I want to add here is that if you're playing Cheating Death, you probably should be running 3 hero cards minimum, just for the way that the uptime works on your heroes. Are going to be dying, they come back, and it just helps you have a little bit more flexibility. So the one thing I'll add here, where Time of Triumph, Annihilation, for example, you're fine with playing it with 2 hero cards. Cheating Death, I would very strongly recommend playing with 3 green hero cards. That said, let's get into the decks themselves. So we're going to be starting off with blue-red control. overall, the theme of this deck is just being able to survive till late game. You're playing things like Time of Triumph to give your cards value, and you have some very early on control of the battlefield. So if you like a slower, more methodical deck, this is probably going to be the one that you gravitate towards first. Let's start off with the heroes. So we have 2 red and 3 blue in this deck. It starts off with Bristleblack, which is a card that might not make a lot of sense. I know there's not too many decks that play this card off the bat, but it is a 8/12, so it's very beefy stat-wise, and whenever it kills a hero that's blocking, it does get modified with +2 armor. Axe itself doesn't have a ability on him that he is blank. That's not a typo or anything like that. He is just a vanilla card in that regard. Of course, he has his signature as well, but he is just a value red beater. The thing that's important to note for Axe is that he has 2 armor, so creeps can never hurt him, and I think that is the main selling point for Axe himself. Talking about the signature cards themselves, we have Viscous Nasal Goo, which is really kind of the backbone of this deck. Being able to modify a unit with -2 armor is going to make all your other ping effects, which we'll talk about shortly, a lot stronger. Plus, if your opponent just has a tanky green creature, you just need to do a little bit more damage to it. Nasal Goo will really help you out in that regard. Berserker's Call is one of my favorite cards in red that I think doesn't get enough love. I think a lot of people appreciate Axe for his stats and his survivability and how good he is at holding a lane, but Berserker's Call, I think, really needs to be utilized more in being able to sacrifice Axe to win the lane, in the sense you're opening up 3 spots. When Axe uses Berserker's Call, he's going to attack the unit in front of it and then to the immediate left and right. You do have to be careful that he only has 2 armor as a base, so you have to do the math for each one. That said, I found myself being able to play various constructed decks where, yes, I just throw Axe under the bus, but I open up slots to maybe my Bounty Hunter or, depending on what heroes you're running in that deck, can suddenly hit the tower, and it puts your opponent in a not so great spot when they have 3 open slots now as they're trying to defend their tower. So I think Berserker's Call is a very strong card, and all around, Axe has to be one of my favorite hero cards, which again is a little bit weird considering I am traditionally a control player from other card games, but somehow being red feels very control-y in Artifact. Moving on to our blue heroes, we have Luna, Zeus, and Ogre Magi, and I have their abilities above them, and most of you are going to be familiar with this. The one thing I do want to note here is that Luna's passive ability has been changed to where it's now 3 random eclipses that get the charge in the deck. So in Constructed, that means nothing. You're only going to have 1 Luna anyways. All 3 of them are going to get the charge. It's fine. In Draft, I think it's still very strong to have double Luna, but it's not anywhere near as insane as it was previous to that nerf, so to speak. Zeus, with his static field ability, deal 1 piercing damage to enemy neighbors after you play a blue spell, is really important when you think about cards of At Any Cost, or his signature, which again, Thunder God's Wrath, we'll talk in a second. Just getting that extra little bit of damage whenever you play a blue spell can really help chip away health, and it is piercing damage, which is very important once you get into that late game territory where either your opponent has some armor items, maybe they played their own Time of Triumph. It just helps you get in that little bit of extra damage. And then Ogre Magi, which is quickly winning over my heart, is one of my favorite blue hero cards, primarily because of Dimensional Portal, and that being one of my favorite blue cards to have right now, is multicast. So not only is this ability just fun for streaming and content creation, if you have like lightning strikes or bolts or dimensional portals, just seeing that multicast flash on the screen is a great feeling. His stats, again, 3/7, maybe not the best, but all blue heroes in general do lack a little bit in their stats, and their late game is supposed to make up for it. For their signatures, we have Eclipse for Luna, which is very strong late game, getting those charges. Often in this deck, you'll be able to play to a position where your red heroes have really helped tank the lane. They're giving you the creep advantage because Axe isn't taking damage. Bristleback should have 2 armor, so they're not, taking that 2 points of damage every round for creep, so that you get that advantage over time. Thus, you get to a point in the game where your opponent might only have 3 or 4 units on board, and Eclipse will have 6 or 7 charges, and all those units will be somewhat damaged. Eclipse very often, or in my opinion, should be saved until it acts as a board clear for you. And sure, you can get the point where Ogre Magi is going to multicast it, but it comes back with 1 charge. So it's not that good, but it's still fine if the game goes long enough and you multicast it early. It's been interesting to see how long the games go and how many extra charges you get onto it, but hey, that's how it goes. What is really good to multicast is Thunder God's Wrath, and I do think we saw a little bit of that with the preview tournament over this past weekend, but Thunder God's Wrath for me is a card that it's really good in some matchups. If your opponent is on mostly blue and black heroes, it feels great. If they're on red and maybe they've already played their own Time of Triumph, they basically negated your first Thunder God's Wrath, and then you have to have multiples to even feel like you're doing something. And with the fact that it's at 7 mana does feel pretty bad when you have to spend 2 or 3 lanes to kill their heroes. Now, sure, if you get a pentakill out of it or something, you kill all 5 at once, it's worth it, but it is very difficult to play against in some matchups. Also to be noted here, green heroes have a lot of regeneration effects, so unless you can again roll 2 Thunder God Wraths before they can get the regeneration effects or play other cards that heal them up, like even a potion, it can be difficult in general to kill red and green heroes with this card, so do keep that in mind. And then Ignite, it is a very interesting one. To that same point, if they're playing red or green, it feels bad, but if they're playing blue or black, it's probably going to be doing work for you. The one thing that is key different here is that if you're playing Kana in your deck, which we'll talk about later, Ignite is really good for getting in that little bit of chip damage so you can get the most out of your signature spell. But outside of that, it does take quite a bit of work to have Ignite really pull in the value. So we've talked about all that damage. We talked about Bristleback. Let's all pull this together and see what it really looks like. Vicious Nasal Goo, whenever you modify that armor, negative armor will increase the damage. So suddenly we have all these different ping effects in your deck that are going to be doing 2 more damage. So Eclipse, Thunder God's Wrath, all those are suddenly going from, Thunder God's Wrath I think is the best example of this, from 4 to 6, and then if you put it in front of it, you have the 1 piercing damage from Zeus, which then becomes 2, and suddenly you are killing stuff in that lane if it's sitting in front of Zeus. I think that's very important to note. And of course, there's other key cards in here, and maybe you flex around and you find some other red spells that you like, but Vicious Nasal Goo really is for these 4 cards and really helping maximize the value out of them, and then also just helping you hold those lanes in case your opponent, plays something like Cheating Death. Maybe you just need a couple extra triggers. You need to do more damage to finish off that last point over and over. Ignite plus Vicious Nasal Goo can really help that out if they have a heal or something. So regeneration's a little bit difficult for this deck, admittedly, but I think you'll find that you have Annihilation or other ways to play around it, and Smash Their Defenses is a key card for this deck in countering Cheating Death, and I think is going to be a staple for all red decks in the near future. The last part I'm going to talk about in all of these decks is the item cards themselves. The one thing to note here is that these are the 3 most common items played in Constructed, bearing any maybe changes. Say Blink Dagger goes from a 3 of to a 2 of, but in general, I'm seeing 3 Stonehall Cloaks in the vast majority of decks, Blink Dagger being a 2 of, and Hourglass being at least a 1 of. Hourglass I personally love, and I think it's one of the best health items in the game because locking is such a strong mechanic, and if you get 2, your opponent is going to be really upset because then it adds 2 locks to every single card your opponent draws, but I see most people just adding it as a 1 of spicy number to combat the blue-green combo Kana deck, which we will be covering in this video as well. Moving on, I do want to talk about my favorite deck and the one that I've been working on quite a bit, Black Red Econ, or just economy decks in general, which really translates to gold generation and buying big expensive items and really doing some flashy stuff. Now, I've spent most of my time in the blue-black version, which is not exactly like the one that we've covered in this video. I think the one that features some lock cards might just be better, but between all of them, I do strongly feel that Black Red Econ is the best version. I have not tested green black, but maybe that's something we talk about in a little bit towards the end, in terms of, you get Revtel, you get some other things, but really Time of Triumph I think is worth it for being able to have a plan B to your deck that is also just good in itself. So yes, you have these expensive items, and if you missed on them, you can still play Time of Triumph and get caught back up. So we've talked about some of the red heroes already, so we'll just cover the black hero cards. In this case, we have Phantom Assassin, which I think everybody loves, being a very efficient killer itself, can deal 10 damage to a hero. That is going to kill most things on the flop and help you get that early gold generation. Bounty Hunter has an effect that can give him a 50-50 roll to deal 11 damage to the tower, which I do want to take a moment and stop here. There's some games where you will just get very lucky. It's just luck at that point. Off the flop where you'll have that creep advantage lane, so Bounty Hunter will be able to hit the tower. You get 11 on the first roll, you go to the next one, maybe they don't get the creep deployment, you'll hit another 11. You get 22 damage on the tower pretty early with Bounty Hunter if they don't have a way to just remove him or interact with him early enough, and that can help you out come very far ahead in that matchup. So Bounty Hunter, I think, as much as he is the bread and butter of economy decks, I really just like him as a black hero in general, being able to hit the towers for a little bit more damage. Yes, it's a 50-50 chance, but hey, 50% of the time works 100% of the time. And then the last card is Sniper, which has the headshot ability. And Sniper, admittedly, for me, is one of the things that I keep going back and forth on if I like it or don't like it. Sniper, Lich, and Tinker are all different cards that I know that they're strong. I just haven't figured out the exact deck I want to play them in yet. But I think Sniper gets a pass here because of his signature card, Assassinate. So with Assassinate, you are dealing 10 piercing damage to a unit in any lane. So yes, you can play this in lane 1 and kill something in lane 3. I really want to stress this point that yes, even though it is 1 mana past Annihilation, it is still key in being able to help hold those lanes so you can clear the way in lane 2 or 3 to get those last couple points of damage you need in the tower before they have the chance to recover. 10 damage often enough is going to be able to kill blue and black heroes and just help you start to chip away at the damage for the red and green heroes. You might get lucky that you can, on the last round, you didn't kill a red and green hero. Assassinate cleans it up and you're fine. If you can't kill a hero, maybe they have just 2 Time of Triumphs really far behind. Maybe they just have a lot of health. Coup de grace really is that hard answer for those heroes. It just straight condemns, which is kill in this game. And yes, you do discard a card, but I want to stress that unless you have something like a Horn of the Alpha in your hand that you just bought, which has happened to me and I discarded it, it really doesn't feel that bad and you can get away with being able to discard a card. Typically, if I am worried about a discard, I will buy some cheaper gold items just to, fill up my hand, have a lower chance of reducing the key card I want to. But often, I think it's just fine. The discard doesn't bother me at all for coup de grace. And then the last thing, which is again the key backbone for the economy decks, is track. Give plus 10 hero bounty. So this means I put the bounty on your Luna. It dies, I gain plus 10 gold, everything's great, and then you can do something like Payday, so you got 15 from that kill, suddenly 15 becomes 30, and then if you're just lucky like me sometimes, you immediately go from that 15 to 30, and then 30 to 60 when you play the second Payday, and getting a horn early is great, getting 2 horns early is insane, and then if you have like Vestures or something, I personally like getting a horn and Vestures early just to help shut down a lane and protect it. You're feeling pretty good at that point. Just again, mention that these 2 cards really are in every single economy deck. Now, the blue-black deck also has the advantage of Annihilation at any cost. You have other ways to get a lot of gold generated in a turn, so maybe Bounty Hunter doesn't always make the list in those cases. Maybe you play Lich or Tinker instead just to have a little bit more flexibility, but I want to just stress this point that if you are trying to make an economy-focused deck, I very strongly believe that it starts with these 2. And I know someone is going to comment with, hey, why no gold mine? There's probably a place for it if you want to have a slower deck. I am treating this very much as a straight combo deck, and gold mine just doesn't do enough for you in terms of gold generation when you want to have it. Sure, in the games where you have it on, round 1, it feels great to play, fantastic, but when you end up drawing it round 3, round 4, you can't spend the mana basically to play that improvement. Now, yes, there's going to be some conditions where for it, but I personally felt it wasn't worth the splash for, worth the other cards. I'd rather play cards that deal damage instead of playing the gold mine just so I can get that extra kill in, and then by that time, you're probably going to be looking into playing your mid game anyway. So things like gank or hip fire or pick off are just better inclusions, in my opinion, than the gold mine. Speaking of those removals that I personally like, we have pick off, hip fire, and gank in this deck. Now, the thing I do want to mention is that both pick off and gank do have the cross lane ability, which again is very important if your opponent has a Luna that you just want to get off the board immediately before they get another charge, or a blue hero in general if you want to stop Annihilate. The strongest part of the House of Cunning really is that cross lane interaction that just no other color can really do. So pick off and gank, while yes, you're often sacrificing your Phantom Assassin for gank, I think these are perfectly fine cards to play. And sure, if the meta does shift in more of a red and green tanky build, maybe pick off does come out, right? Dealing 4 damage might not always be great, but I think a lot of people will be on blue or black cards at the start, which does increase the value of pick off at least a little bit, in my opinion. The last 2 things, we talked about items all up to this point, and what are the 2 most common econ focused decks building? If you're building the red-black econ list, you are likely going all in on Horn of the Alpha. You get a very beefy 14/14 creature, which can help you battle down a tower. So even if your unit dies, what often happens is I'll use a Horn of Alpha, my unit will die, but I'm still left a body behind that can help push tower damage, and then by the time my hero comes back up, I feel perfectly fine moving it to a different lane, playing the Horn of Alpha with the effect again, or the activated effect again, and dropping down just another massive unit that my opponent has to deal with. The other thing I think that doesn't get nearly enough attention, but also depends on the deck that you're playing, is Vesture of the Tyrant. This is a card that blue-black economy wants to run a 3 of, or at least in my opinion should always be a 3 of, because you have to spend the early games from such a behind start unless you get the amazing combo of like and 1 for me and you get triple horn in round 2, which happened exactly one time in closed beta for me. But Vestures allows you to be able to play Annihilation, have the rapid deployment, get right back into the game, and help progress the board state. I want to stress how important rapid deployment is in this case, because if you are playing the blue-black economy deck, all things equal, unless you just get some insane gold generation start, the only realistic way that you're beating the Time of Triumph decks, at least in my experience, we'll see how the meta continues to go, is with a vestured blue hero that plays Annihilation, immediately comes back the next round, and then just drops threats in that lane to get in that damage for that turn. I think the win rate is probably around 30% against red decks. It feels awful. It is really awful for a blue-black econ. And I think that's why ultimately, for at least my day one, week 1 deck, what have you, will be focused on the red-black econ list. And this one, again, is mine, so it's very close to this that you'll see me streaming on this coming Saturday, actually, when the NDA is lifted. Moving on from there, we have green-red ramp, or hey, I wish I was playing Hearthstone ramp druid. This list really is kind of an all-in generation on playing big threats as early as round 2 if you just get the absolute nut draws. While that doesn't always happen, and you can always lose in that position still, you're feeling pretty good if you can pull off a turn 2 Time of Triumph, for example. It is a very expensive deck coming in at 18 rares, making this the most expensive constructed deck, at least that I've seen. So do keep that in mind, that if you're trying to build this day 1, week 1, what have you, I would recommend against it. A lot of people are going to be charging, $20, $30 for Axe simply because they can within the first couple days until the economy settles or until we understand how the market is going to be in flux. So I want to stress that one more time. As fun as this deck is to play, I strongly recommend against building it within the first week. It'll simply be too expensive and card prices will drop. All right, enough warning out of the way. Let's talk about the heroes. Again, we've talked about Axe, and everyone knows Legion Commander and her dual effect, so we are going to be focusing on just the green heroes. Omni Knight is one of my favorites, and yes, I realize how insane Drow is, but if we take Drow out of the equation, Omni Knight really is my favorite, and I personally feel like he is the best green hero card. Now, yes, again, it's going to depend a little bit depending on what your deck wants to be doing, but the amount of beefy stats he has in combination with just that overall regeneration effect, that heal on 3, plus his signature, makes it a card that I think is worth sticking around. Drow herself is not only a combo protector, but also a all 3 lane buffer. I'm still surprised, and I think a lot of other beta testers are still surprised that this card, at least the month that I was in, has not been changed. I don't know exactly what I would do to change Drow Ranger. Yes, it did get a rarity boost by the card itself, but it does just feel like a crushingly strong, all-around decent card. Yes, the drawback is, but it only has 7 health. Yeah, put a Stonehall Cloak on it, and it's fine. I think that the buff that you're going to be getting, especially if you're playing a blue-green Swarm deck, it makes it very hard not to play this hero. And then last is Trent Protector, which is really just a beefy guy, and he has a unit that lets you ramp as well. And personally, between Trent Protector and Enchantress, they're doing slightly different things. Do you want all in on the ramp effect? Do you want some defense? It does vary a little bit on what those 2 hero cards do, but I am curious to see if Trent Protector or Enchantress sees more play in the end. For their signature cards, we have All Seeing One's Favor for Omni Knight, which again is one of my favorite cards because you do get that +2 regeneration, and it is a green hero. So you do have the option to say, okay, well, Omni Knight is good. You're probably going to give it to him the first one anyways because he has a heal effect. It can really help hold a lane. But then maybe you give it to Drow. Maybe you give it to Trent, right? You give it to one of those other heroes that's going to be deployed in a different lane because generally speaking, you're going to be splitting out your green heroes thanks to cheating death anyways, and you get even more survivability across those other lanes. I think it is a very strong signature card and one that I definitely don't hate seeing 3 ofs and drawing multiples of them over the course of a game. Gust is just a silly card, and there's no other way to say it. It somehow only costs 4, and it silences all enemy heroes for that round. So if you're playing a combo deck, or if you just want to ensure that your turn is protected in that lane, gain initiative, play Gust, and then your opponent just can't do anything. They just kind of sit there and cry. Now, it's not a disarm, because that would certainly break the card in half, but Gust itself is extremely, extremely strong, and I would not be surprised in the slightest if we see this card go to either 5 or 6 mana. Now, that's not going to solve all the issues that we see in, say, the blue-green combo deck, but I would feel a lot better about this card if it did have a mana increase at some point. And then for our tree boy, we have Roseleaf Druid, which is just it's an okay body at 2/6. It's going to, take down some creeps along the way for you, but it gives your tower +1 mana. Again, we're really just trying to ramp into those expensive cards. And so what are those expensive cards, right? We have Stars Align and Salamane's Favor for your various ramp effects. That is basically Dark Ritual. Nice to see another card game playing the Ritual effect. I guess we're going to keep using it. And then you have just your standard ramp, which adds 2 mana to a lane. And then you have Time of Triumph, which we opened up with being a very, very strong card. And then we have Emissary. Now, Emissary is an interesting card that by itself, it is, it has a lot of health, not a lot of attack, but its active ability really helps bring it back into play for you with giving everything in your lane +2 attack and 2 health. This is something that your opponent is going to want to kill immediately if possible if they have a Slay, or they're probably going to be going out of their way to kill as soon as possible. It's important to note that +2 health, the correct way to think about it is it's going to heal your creeps so that if on a creep versus creep battle, it's that not only are they going to survive, they're going to one-shot your opponent's creeps. So on the first activation of Emissary, all your creeps are winning, all your heroes are feeling great. But then on the second one, you really start to accumulate that advantage. So most of the time, if you're already ahead on damage, you can have a green hero in lane 1, drop the Emissary, buff it up a couple times, blink them out, and go on about your day because it's going to carry it the rest of the way. Now, if they're playing blue, you do have to be mindful of something like Annihilation. If you have Cheating Death in that lane, just keep it in the lane and then win more in that case. It will vary depending on the matchup, how you're going to go to win that lane. But again, Emissary is going to be carrying a lot of weight with it. And then again, between either one of these, do keep in mind that they are going to be either stronger or not as effective depending on what your opponent's playing and how you might want to navigate the battle. For example, if they're playing black and I know that they're going to have Slay, which just contems a creep, I'm more likely to play Time of Triumph first, all things equal, than the Emissary because they have a very cheap answer to that most likely. So do keep that in mind as you're deciding which card to really ramp into. And then lastly, I did mention it, but Blink Dagger is just the other card here that, in my opinion, is the most important because you are able to play these cards that can just win the lane on their own, and then plus you can just be more smart with your mana in lane 1. Maybe you drop a Cheating Death to lane 2, blink on over, you get the advantage, and they can use that mana for other things. So Blink Dagger really is just an all-around constructed all-star, but I think is really pulling the weight here in this list, probably more so than some of the other lists that we've covered in this video. The other thing I want to talk about is this blue-green combo deck. Now, this is one of the decks that a lot of people have talked about early on in the constructed tournaments, that they just ramped out a bunch of the hounds, Kana's hounds, and just obliterated a tower in one turn. Again, this one is a little bit more on the expensive side with 14 rares, and it does take quite a bit of skill to pilot at the end of the day because you have to know when to use certain cards. But I think if someone's looking to play just an all-out combo deck, this is going to be another great opportunity. Kana being the only card that we really haven't talked about here, it is very, very beefy at 12 health. Again, the stats here as what we expect to see for a blue hero might just seem completely unusual, and that's fine, but it really is about the Bringer of Conquest for her passive ability, making sure that the melee creeps spawn into her lane. So you really do need her to stick around. And then again, at that 2 damage, she's really not killing a creep, which arguably does go into her signature card, but at the same time does feel pretty bad when you're not able to generate a lot of gold in her lane early on. It just creates this kind of bumping heads against one another stalemate. The card that is so strong, and I am not shocked at all that this is going to see a lot of play in our first round of constructed meta, is Prey on the Weak. For every damage unit on the board, or in that lane rather, on your side and your opponent's side, you're going to summon a Hound of War, which is a 2/1 attacker. And that really might not sound all that impressive. You're only dealing 2 damage, but when you combine it with things like Emissary, where you're able to pump it, or you're able to just have other cards in green will buff them and make them stronger by either giving them more attack or giving them more health, very quickly you can create this blue-green swarm deck, which is going to do a lot of damage out of nowhere. Yes, you do have, that one turn perhaps to play Annihilation. You can play at any cost. Various colors do have various answers to it, but it is very, very strong, and I do not at all doubt that we will see this card have a lot of play in the first set. Now, what do we really have for the different combos within this deck? And it's really just the core of it itself. So Diabolic Revelation really helps you churn through your deck. You're going to deal 2 damage to all allies in all lanes. So again, not just when you're playing, all lanes across the board. So that might sound bad, I understand, but think about Kana again. We want to damage stuff early on and be able to trigger more hounds. Emissary, conveniently, does help us grant 2 health. So there is turns where you're able to play Emissary. You're going to recharge it with Incarnation, which again, Incarnation of Salamene is the key card to make this all happen. But generally speaking, how it's going to go, play Emissary, play Diabolic Revelations, ping everything, play your Hound of Wars, recharge it, get a bunch of tokens, have your Emissary, buff all of them, play Diabolic Revelations again, and you can start to see how you have that 2 health point life swing going back and forth. Now again, if you have another Emissary, you play that Emissary, buff everything again, Diabolic again, draw more cards, have more hounds on the board, and this will 80 your opponent out of nowhere, or at a minimum, just kill the tower, right? Depending on how the match is going, you might be going for that second tower kill or the Ancient, but oof, you are summoning a lot of cards and a lot of units to the lane at that time. Now, it is worth noting that this deck is the reason why a lot of people turn to Hourglass, keeping in mind it states when your opponent draws a card, you add 1 lock to it, so that just completely shuts down Diabolic Revelations. It stops them in their tracks. That said, they might have some either various removal or other ways to get rid of your item, so it's not always going to be a surefire thing, but it is often going to be enough to help you stall the game to where they have to do significantly more work to make it happen. So it feels pretty good, and I think Hourglass just in general is a very strong card that more people should be playing. The one interesting item that came out of this was Cloak of Endless Carnage, that whenever a neighbor dies, you get to draw a card, and it gives +8 health. It is a bit expensive at 13 gold, and keeping in mind this is only directly neighbored, so if you're playing Kana, for example, it's going to be the unit to the left, unit to the right. So generally speaking, if you're comboing off with the Diabolic Revelations, you're only going to draw 2 cards, but that's still 2 more cards that you're going to be drawing, and 8 health is quite a bit of health to put onto a hero card. Now, does this card make the list in the new constructed format? Does this deck survive with everybody playing Vestures? I'm not sure totally. I have not spent a lot of time playing this deck. I think I played 2 games with it at this point just to see kind of how it goes, how it flows out against other decks. But this is one that I think if you love playing combo decks and you are the type of person who will spend, the 50 or 100 hours to really refine this list and take it to a tournament, I think you'll do well. I very strongly do believe that if you put the time into it, this deck will reward you, and this is a very solid template to start from. The last sort of honorable mention here is Black, Blue, Lock, or Econ. It's kind of the split list. So I've talked about this quite a bit in the Discord. I've dropped, I think, 3 or 4 different revisions now of the deck that I played. This one is more so based on Oxar's list that he played very early on when we were playing some games together, talking about the different lock cards and how strong they could be, but it is one that has a very poor matchup against red-based decks that are playing Time of Triumph, and hopefully by this point in the video, you've learned that Time of Triumph is a card that you're going to see quite a bit of. So how does this deck really stack up in the meta? I'm not sure yet, but it is a very strong list once you get outside of that matchup. So maybe you just accept that there's one really poor matchup and everything else is winnable. That's for you to decide how far you want to go or how much time that you want to invest into that deck. So the 2 main lock cards that we have here are Buying Time and Hourglass, which we've talked about quite a bit. But Buying Time is also worth noting here that it is a blue spell, so you can multicast it off of Ogre Magi, and trust me, it feels great when you do, because often you're able to play it, multicast, play it in the next lane, and suddenly your opponent is running very low on options. I will say that being able to see this early, getting to multicast it early, does help out significantly in every matchup, as you would expect. So for those, I will add a note here, for those that don't know, lock basically puts a shocker lock on the card that they can't play it for that amount of turns. So if you draw a card with Hourglass, it has 1 lock on it. You can't play it until your next turn. 2 lock, can't play it for 2 more turns, what have you. Again, what I mentioned very early on, for example, is if you have 2 Hourglasses, it adds 2 locks to every single card and can just basically soul crush your opponent into oblivion when suddenly their whole hand is grayed out. They can't play anything. But hey, it feels great from our end, right? The one thing I really want to mention here at the end is A-Blade or Apotheosis Blade. I think that's how you say it. Terrible pronunciation here with names. This is a card I think is just not getting enough love whatsoever. And I do want to say that and then also stress immediately that this card doesn't go in every deck. I understand that. But in your blue-black economy-based decks, you cannot beat Cheating Death. It is a card that, trust me, it'll drain your soul. It feels bad. It'll just, you need a way around it. And this is the only answer that we really had outside of the Orb, which can also condemn an improvement, but I don't like that as an option because it's a one and done thing. Just go all out. This blade helps you kill their heroes, gives you some siege damages. It's all around value that you get out of this 25 gold. And I personally believe that if you're trying to make this deck work, you need a minimum one of these. And I personally run 2 because there's often times where I want to have them split across the lanes, or maybe you don't draw your and one for me that to copy it. So having a second one in your item deck can really be beneficial. So that's all I have for this video, guys. I really hope you did enjoy it. That's a lot of information. This is a longer video, so if you stuck it out to this point, kudos. But here is the question for you at the end of it. What is the play for day 1, week 1? Which one of these decks are you leaning towards, and which deck do you want to see me play on stream coming up on the 17th? And again, I will be taking 2 weeks off to stream Artifact and maybe do some more content for, but I will primarily be focused around streaming it as much as I can. So I'll post stuff to Twitter and whatnot when I plan on going live, so you guys can look forward to more content. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to hit that like button and drop a subscribe as well. It does help me out a lot. I will try to release more videos like this for Artifact in the near future. My plan is currently 1 video a week when possible, while on top of that streaming 4 to 5 days a week. So we'll see what it has for me. Until next time, guys, we'll catch you in the Sage of Sanctuary on Twitch. Have a good one.